and welcome to another episode of the Studio 78 podcast. I am your host, Nache from NacheSnow.com. Welcome. All right, I have Jessica Bellamy on here today. She is a designer and she gives a lot of information. I wasn't even sure what to entitle the episode, but I felt like the title, the importance of creating diverse and inclusive business graphics kind of summed it all up, because it's really thinking about the information you're putting out there, who you're putting it out there to, and making sure that it actually reflects your entire audience and that you're being kind of inclusive when you're creating your information and being really thoughtful on your audience and how you're distributing that information. So I think what really kind of sums up Jessica and what she represents is a quote that's on her website. And the quote says, "The design industry is such a powerful force. Designers have an opportunity to use their talents to create and support mindful, authentic narratives featuring unconventional and underrepresented perspectives and faces." So on here, we talk a little bit about everything from big data, how it's being used in society, how to work with nonprofits, tips for creating visuals, and the benefits of creating workshops. And we also talk a little bit about her residency with Adobe. So lots of different information in here. And I think regardless of, if you're a traditional 9-to-5 career woman or if you own your own business, the conversation that we have in this episode, I think, is good for everyone to hear, because if you are working for a nonprofit and you're looking to make sure that the right information gets to the right people, there's some really good information in here. To if you are a personal brand on Instagram and you want to make sure that you are representing your audience, like thinking through the images that you're using, the information that you're using to make sure that it is inclusive and that your audience actually feels like that you're thinking about them too and just not one demographic. So it's just very thought-provoking, and I can't wait to kind of hear what you guys think about this episode. But of course, you can find the show notes for this page over at NacheSnow.com/106. I also would love to hear from you guys on social media, so please comment under the post for this particular episode. I'd love to hear kind of what you guys think about it and ideas that you have. And before we begin, just 2 quick housekeeping things. 1, please rate me 5 stars. It just takes 2 seconds. If you head on over to Apple Podcasts, it helps people find the show. Also, if you're on YouTube, thumbs up, please. And please subscribe to wherever you are listening and share the episode. That's really how these episodes get out there into the world, when you guys share them in different, especially Facebook groups, but even on IG stories. I really see the numbers in my pretty links go up. So thank you for those of you all who've already shared multiple episodes. And for those of you guys who really enjoy this episode or any others, please share it, because it really helps out the show. And then the last thing, of course, you guys could check out my course, How to Organize Your Life to Make Time for Your Passion, over on Skillshare. You could go to NacheSnow.com/Skillshare. And not only do you get access to my course, but you'll get access to the other courses. And if you're not already a Skillshare member, you can get 2 months free, which is amazing and kind of perfect for this time in our lives during COVID-19. It's very weird doing the podcast now, because I recorded all the episodes beforehand. And so now I feel like I need to almost interview other people and just ask them how they're surviving during COVID-19. So stay tuned. I might try to sneak in a couple of episodes in the next month if I end up getting some time. But anywho, head on over to Skillshare. Definitely use this time if for some reason you have a little extra time on your hands. Everybody's situation is different. To educate yourself on leadership, briefing. They have calligraphy, photography, you name it. They have courses over there. And of course, my course on being organized. All right. Let's get to the episode. Hello, Jessica. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I love all the things you're doing as a designer by trade. I knew I'm like, okay, next season I need to have a graphic designer on talking about all the things about storytelling and, making sure you know how to use visuals effectively and all of that good stuff. And so I saw all your work and I was like, I need to have her on here.
Well, thank you so much. I'm flattered. I'm so flattered.
And I can't wait to just talk a little bit about the Adobe Creative Residency too, because that seemed like it was a pretty cool experience that really opened up some doors for you.
Definitely did.
But before we get into all of that, can you just tell the listeners a little bit about your background?
Yeah, for sure. So I am an information designer as well as a researcher and a community organizer. Those are three very different fields that I cultivated skill sets in on a very meandering path, I feel like. So I have, in my past, I've worked as a research analyst at the University of Louisville in the Neurodevelopmental Science Lab for about 5 years. I was trained in organizing by organizations like the Network Center for Community Change, and I learned a lot from doing community organizing work with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, which is a statewide multi-platform organization. As far as information design is concerned, I have 2 BFAs, one that's in graphic design, and it was really through my organizing work that I actually started applying my information design skills in more tangible ways. I definitely was the type of student back in college who would turn papers into infographics, but when the first moment that I had the opportunity to take critical data points and make them more easily digestible for community folks, it ended up being the turning point in my career, where I ended up quitting my cushy little research job and starting a social enterprise called Grids, the Grassroots Information Design Studio, where I worked for over 5 years, creating infographics in partnerships with nonprofits and community groups. Now I work at the Root Cause Research Center, which is the perfect alignment of all 3 of my main skill sets. I have been traveling really for the last 2 years, doing a lot of workshops and doing a lot of presentations on what it really means to be an information designer that's grounded in conscious and responsible principles of design. I've been doing so much workshops teaching people infographic composition, teaching people what data equity is, and how that can play out in whatever work that they're doing. Yeah, I think that's the full scope of what I've been doing.
Yeah. So for some of the folks listening out there, they probably are hearing terms like data equity and then, using, data to, create information graphics. Like if you could break it down for someone who isn't as familiar, how would you break it down? Because I think sometimes when people hear graphics, they think like Instagram, it's an image and with some words I put on there from an app, but if you could just break it down for people who are like, well, what do you mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm essentially a visual storyteller. I take any types of complex information, whether or not it's a city's budget, right? And I break it down into visuals, which sometimes that could mean animation, sometimes that could mean graphic illustration, sometimes that can mean a series of visual metaphors to help people better understand systems, better understand where money's going, where resources are going, any type of information that's really pertinent for the people that are most impacted by an issue. So right now with the Root Cause Research Center, we've been doing a lot of work around housing injustices. And so we're able to work alongside people that are most impacted by that issue here in our city by training them in some of our skill sets so that they can start to equip themselves really as well as we're equipping them with data resources, but we want to teach them the skills that we have so that they can continue to do it in their organizing work. Because one thing that I've learned in my career is that so many people that are vulnerable to any type of change in a neighborhood or any type of injustice or systemic oppression, those folks generally are not given much information about the context of their situation. And oftentimes they're used as essentially test subjects when people examine or study that issue. And when you do that, you continually take that person and put them on the table rather than allowing them to be at the table, because they have just as much valuable data as what an analyst can dig up. Their data is generally the social context, cultural context, so many things that actually build out what data means in the data economy that we live in today, which data is just numbers. It's just a collection of information, a collection of facts. It can be anything from a numerical something or a quote or just piece of information from that's verbal. All of that is data. And we're in a time where the collection of data actually amounts to great value. And researchers were traditionally the ones who would leverage that value. But now we have major companies that leverage the value of information. And a lot of this information is kept away from people that are most vulnerable to, like I said, systemic oppressions and stuff like that. Data is used to determine whether or not a person is deserving of bail. Data is used to determine whether or not someone should be hired at a job. Data is used to determine whether or not someone should get a loan for a home. And when people aren't aware of what systems are in place that are continuing to reinforce racism, bias, any of those types of things, then they don't know necessarily how to combat it, let alone to have a conversation about it. But once they are made aware of those nuances from their own personal perspective and their own context of the situation, oftentimes you can find solutions that are non-traditional to try to create a new methodology for doing whatever that end game is. Because oftentimes these people that are collecting data, that are using it against vulnerable populations, they're not evil, right? They're not evil. They're greedy. They're oftentimes greedy.
Right.
They're not intrinsically evil, right? And so when you start to inform people about the ununderstandable, right? This mystic data that exists out there, when more people have that knowledge, then they start to raise concerns and start to ask questions that no one's ever asked before. And that always leads in some direction, which generally means progress.
Yeah.
I hope that was helpful. That was a long answer.
No, it's good. Good stuff. Now, question for you, because I know some of the listeners out there, some of them want to give back. They're creative. They want to give back in some way. But a lot of times, and I've heard it from some folks, is they're like, but I have to eat too, right? And I think sometimes, even though not true, like when people hear like working with nonprofits, they're like, oh, but we probably won't get paid. Like, I really want to do this work because I'm passionate about it and I want to do it full time. But I'm not going to be able to like sustain like a decent lifestyle without killing myself by working 2-3 other jobs. So kind of what do you kind of say to those folks out there? Because I think sometimes people don't pursue kind of like what's in their heart when it comes to giving back, because they don't think they'll be able to make a living off of it. And they grapple with that too, right? Like, is it bad to make a living off of something that is making a difference? But without one, you can't do the other sometimes. So kind of how did you work through that, and any advice you can give for creatives that are also going through that?
Absolutely. I think I have, because there were like 4 different components, I think, to what your question had,
Yeah.
I think 4. So I'm gonna go through each one. The first piece of advice I want to offer is that it is important to participate. If there's a specific issue you want to work around, or a specific nonprofit you want to work for, you should volunteer. Show that you are invested and interested in that cause. Or whatnot, if you are new to being a designer to nonprofits. I do think that building your portfolio, building those relationships will help build you value. 2, continue to build value by being more than just a designer. When you think of nonprofits have pretty finite budgets, and their money is prioritized towards working the cause or operational, stuff. So to convince someone to really invest in you and your contribution, bringing something more to the table than a well-designed flyer, I think is essential. Oftentimes, so like in my career, when I started doing grids and all of that, I found myself doing a lot of community strategy building, which is how I became not community strategy, but communication strategy building, which is why I became so good at information design. When you think about all the work that it takes to even get to the graphic, that is a huge valuable skill set, because oftentimes with nonprofits, when they do want a designed piece, I don't think they realize what's necessary to make that design piece work hard, right? Because you want to think about that target audience. You want to think about what motivates that target audience to action. That target audience has a visual culture, language that you need to tap into. There's so many things about media vehicles that you need to think about. And oftentimes I was getting jobs just in consultation with nonprofits, because if they already have an in-house designer, or, cousin Becky who does the flyers, you know what I mean? Like, even if she's using, just Microsoft Publisher or Paint, I don't know what Becky's using, but,
Right.
Sitting down with Becky and doing like an hour or 2 of consultation where I'm like, Becky, show me all the things you've designed, and just going through and helping them critique to get to those, to get better assets, right? And that's more affordable to them sometimes to do it that way. And it allows you to get those consultation hours, and it takes less of your time while building that value in that relationship. And once you are more trusted, that's when you start to get those larger projects from that client, especially when you're building from the ground up, and they get to know who you are and what you bring. Because it is very hard to find a way to sustain yourself working in the nonprofit sector alone as a designer. So you have to learn more than just how to do that final product. Oftentimes I've met designers who are, they love making logos. That's great. But if you want a nonprofit, or really kind of any organization, to hire you, let's talk about what brand identity is and what that looks like. All of those nuances that are so important to building into that design and that final piece, so that it has longevity and it has more robust impact. Like, that's how you need to build yourself, so that your value is paramount and that you can beat out any other designer, right? The competitive nature of the industry, I guess. I'm trying to think of what other things that you kind of asked in that question.
No, I think you got
Yeah.
to it where, it's like, number one, if you're passionate about something, you start with like volunteering. And if you want to make a living doing something that you're passionate about, it's making sure you have multiple skill sets, especially as a designer, right? Making
Oh,
sure
yes.
that, especially with a nonprofit, that not only can you say, oh, I can do your logo, I can do your whole brand identity, and I can do your,
Yes.
information graphics, and I can go out there and do X, Y, and Z, but making yourself
Mm-hmm.
more marketable.
Mm-hmm.
So question for you for Adobe Creative Residence. So I know you did that, I believe, I think it was back in 2017.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what made you apply for it, and what were you hoping to get out of it, and were you able to kind of accomplish your goals?
Yeah, so I applied because I was invited to apply. Essentially, one of the Adobe staff members heard me on a podcast. I was on, shoot, what is it called? Revision
Mm.
Path, by Maurice Cherry. Maurice Cherry does this great podcast of Black designers, and they just talk about all sorts of things. He has like a whole list of questions. It's really great. He has a great archive too to look back into if folks ever feel interested. But yeah, one of them had heard my session and reached out to me on Facebook, and I did not believe them that the thing even existed. I like the person's name was Heidi, and I was like, I don't know any Heidis. Heidi's not a real name. I'm from Kentucky and I'm Black. I did not know any Heidis, but I did. I investigated, and it was real, so I applied. And and you asked me what else about the residency, like what it is, or
Yeah. Well, once you decided to apply, of course they reached out and you're like, okay,
mm-hmm.
sure. But, what were you hoping to get out of it? And then I believe it's like a year-long
mm,
residency. So how did it help
yes.
you in your career?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was hoping at the time for it to really be, I guess, a slingshot for my career to do larger projects. With grids at the time, I did have a few national clients, but I was primarily working locally. It was a great honor to be asked to invited to apply. But the type of proposal that I wrote initially was to do like essentially toolkits for nonprofits all over the country. Like I wanted to do all sorts of
Mm.
work that would be directly with all sorts of individuals. But their feedback, they loved my portfolio, they loved my proposal, but they wanted me to do more broad, more nationally impacting sort of stuff. So when I was accepted, what my proposal or what my work actually ended up doing was two things. I ended up working more on motion infographics. I wanted to expand and challenge myself in that arena.
Mm.
And two, I wanted to do workshops, what I called graphic ally hands. So we're required as residents to do some type of sharing out, some type uh, of something, whether it's a workshop or presentation, but something that engages other creatives on a national or larger scale. And so when I decided to do these workshops, they were like, okay, we'll just do like 3 of them. You want to focus on, your content and all of that. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. But when I did the first one, I don't think that even Adobe expected me to have such a defined approach to how I do my work. So when I did the first one, they like recorded like part of it and they like shared it out, right? And when I was doing it then, it was I would pick a nonprofit in a city, and the folks that attended that workshop would learn about my approach to doing this work, which is very rich and I have very specific principles and tactics. And then we would make like prototypes for that nonprofit for some type of project that they might want to do. And when they did this promo footage and we put it out there in the ether, I was getting calls left and right about me doing this workshop somewhere. Yeah, I got calls from Yale, from Carnegie Mellon, UCLA. So many conferences reached out. And I really wasn't supposed to do more than 3, but I ended up doing 15 during my
Wow,
residency.
that's a
and
lot.
I know it's a lot. That's a lot. But I still do them today. I still do around 10 a year. If time will allow me, because with work balance, it's not always as good with my schedule, but I still do them, and I do them even internationally now. I've done them in Canada. I've done them in Germany. But yeah, I do them all over the country predominantly. But yeah, there's so much to my methodology that's more than just the physical design aspect, like the compositional design part of information graphics. My approach is very much about the way that you have to start thinking about or rethinking about data, the ways that we tend to unintentionally objectify or exploit, the ways that we unintentionally might misrepresent anything or underrepresent. A big thing that I talk about is how oftentimes critical data points that are people, right, that are about something very important, are well hidden behind pie charts and bar graphs, rather than there being some type of conversation there visually to let people know that this is something bad. This is something that we need to pay attention to. And so my approach to that was also to start to create tools so that people could start building their data layout library in their mind, right? Because I realized pretty early on that most people, pie charts and bar graphs are the only thing that they think of when they think of data visuals, right? But there are so many layout possibilities. So I started making these like tools. I made the infographic wheel that I got an award for last year, which helps people pick a infographic layout based on the characteristics of their data. I started making different data tools for my workshops in general, so that people could have at least 50 layouts to choose from as they start to experiment with data. And all this experimentation and play, and through the workshops, and even my own personal experimentation with infographics, with motion and all that stuff, the more content and thought that I started to share with people, the more reach I obtained, because I continue to get invited to spaces to talk about those things, the type of things that I guess I think about way too often that I kind of forget I think about. but yeah, no, it's been great. I feel like the residency gave me a huge amount of exposure, and it pushed me to even further not only challenge myself, but further define why I do what I do, because I know what I do, but giving that why to people. I work with anyone from epidemiologists, students, people that are just interested in the field, designers. I work with all kinds of folks doing workshops, consultations, and all of that beautiful mess. Mm-hmm.
For a listener out there, they might say, like, okay, well, I have, my company helps people who have, maybe they're selling something that helps people who, I'm just making something up, but like skin conditions, right? And they're like, I want to educate them about, how, provide them data points on how many other people might be dealing with eczema or something more serious, and, give them more information on how to, like, better treat themselves or what have you. But, they're probably thinking in their mind, but I'm not really a designer. And even if I work with a designer, how do I go about collecting this data and then creating an infographic that will reach my audience so I can better educate them about X topic, right? And then help them to relieve their skincare or whatever issues. So what do you tell people who don't really know how to approach information graphics that aren't designers?
Oh, well, I asked them to come to my workshops, really, because yeah, well, I'm very serious, because I intentionally do my workshops no tech, low tech, so that the skills that you learn are not not for translating into InDesign. They're for translating into whatever you got. And I have like a list of different tools that are both low tech to high tech ways of realizing whatever piece they make. But it is doable. Like, number one that you need to know is that it's doable. I have this list of how-to research sort of thing, just for people that are new to doing any type of research. We also have, at the Root Cause Research Center, we've developed a community research curriculum, which is meant to be an inviting approach to allow people that have no experience in doing research or finding data points or anything like that, to help them learn how to do that on their own. But as far as the design part, it's really learning about composition and basic design principles. But you need to have that communication strategy to be tight before you even think about touching your computer. And to build that strategy, you need to think about target audience, call to action, and what that media vehicle is and why. And there's so many nuances about whether or not the data should be asset-facing or deficit-facing, whether it should be more objective versus more focused on advocacy, whether or not the images you're choosing are creating an implicit bias. Like, how do you start to build work in the macro context rather than focusing on just that end user, just so that you can continue to fight against stigmas that we build into our visual language, right? That's in this country. There's a lot. There's not an easy, quick answer to what you asked me. That's why I said go to the workshop, because
that's good stuff.
It goes through a lot of things, but it's meant for people at the novice level to be able to participate and feel comfortable with infographics by the end,
Yeah, I mean, because some things that, one thing that you mentioned that people don't think about is like what you said about images, right? Regardless of what kind of company you're running, somebody goes to your website or to your Instagram account, people don't realize that the images that they have chosen sends a message, right? Depending on if it's, all one ethnicity, if, what kind of emotions, that the images are portraying. I mean, there's just so many different things, the colors that they're, so many things.
Even the way that it's cropped. Like, there is so much psychology behind it. So, like, when I worked in a lab, I worked in a psychology lab. And so, like, when you tend to close in closer on someone's head, right, you start to imbue ideas of personality, of intellect. When you start to show a full, like, body, a full torso, you start to think more about, you start to objectify that individual and you start to focus more on their body. I mean, you can do a content analysis of the covers of magazines. Like, if you're looking at Time magazine, you're probably going to see just the head of some individual, versus like Cosmopolitan, you're probably going to see a full body, and that full body might be photoshopped or edited in some type of way to make it even more salacious, right? And easy to objectify. Like, there's so many ways that we unconsciously are communicating systems of oppression or some other cultural nuance that we just aren't even aware of, just to have that end game of having that final design product, right?
I love it.
It's complex.
It is. And then just one last question before I get to the wrap-up questions. Just about any advice on workshops, because I know a lot of folks have a message that they want to put out and they're like, oh my goodness, it would be great to have a workshop for women to, empower them to do X, Y, Z or whatever it might be. But they're just like, oh, well, what if no one shows up? And how do I prepare the content for it? So I just wanted to know if you had any kind of like lessons learned from doing workshops now for a while.
It's hard to get over that maybe no one will show up feeling, because imposter syndrome is so real, right? We're constantly going to question ourselves. And I think even more so demographically speaking, like as a woman, I think we're cultured to question ourselves, right? And what our contribution is, right, to the world. I would say do research. Do research on, like, write down what your practice is. Let's say you're trying to do a workshop on fishing, right? If you have a specific methodology of how you fish, write that down, look at it, think about it, do research of other people's like fishing techniques, right? Into what they're doing, see how you differ. Because one thing that I think is really useful is when you start to compare your process to others, you start to reaffirm why you do things in certain ways or evaluate and try out new things, right, that help you along the way. And I do think that doing workshops allows you to build yourself as a thought leader. It allows you to experiment in ways that you haven't thought of before, because now you're working with others and creating some type of product. I get a lot out of every workshop that I do, and I like to keep any type of doodles and sketches, whatever people do at the end of the workshop. Mainly because there's so many different contexts and ways of thinking of things. And it could be an error in my delivery, why some people think of things in a way that I never imagined. And sometimes it's just this beautiful miracle where I watch people do something I did not expect. And I feel very impacted in a positive way. Like, it gives me the opportunity to grow my perception, because now I've experienced someone else's experience for half a second through seeing what they produce in this specific scenario. So I think it's good for gathering clients, becoming that type of thought leader. It's great for your creative process, getting past the worries of the value of what you're contributing is not something that's ever really going to go away. Because I feel like for as many workshops as I've done, which I've done a lot, I've done so many, I still don't feel the value of what I'm giving folks. It feels good and exciting when people tell me they really enjoyed it, or they message me later, or whatever. That's wonderful. But I think it's just more about do it for a multitude of reasons. Don't just do it because you think, because you're trying to gain value in what you're doing. When I say gain value, like reaffirm why you do what you do. Because I think, does that make sense?
No, absolutely, 100%. No, that was great. So just a few wrap-up questions. The first one is, how do you stay organized? Any tools, software, techniques you want to pass along?
Oh, sure. So I do a lot of things using Google stuff, and Google's one of the chief people that collect so much data on us. So I really want to find an alternative, honestly. But I use Google Tasks, so I can add to my priority list to I have like a list that's just all about the speaking or presentation stuff, so I can keep them in order and knowing what's next. It's connected to my calendar. It's how I schedule calls. It's really how I stay organized. But creating healthy boundaries, I think, is the biggest thing for anyone to know. If you know that you are most productive in the mornings, then don't schedule calls in the mornings. Don't do it. Mm-hmm. Don't even look at your email in the morning. Email is the largest life suck and drainer, of our vitality, I think, in the world. The email is important, but it completely sidetracks you. There was some study that I read actually earlier today that was saying something like, when a person is on a track of focus, when they deviate from that track, it takes around 8 minutes to fully focus again. And if you think about the course of your day, how many times you deviate from whatever task you're on, what percentage of your workday is actually you trying to refocus,
Yes.
Yeah. All that lost time. So, yeah.
No, that's good information. No, because, and, especially with, going back to the emails, I mean, they will suck the life out of you if you let them. They will rule your life.
They will.
And the thing about it is, if you say I'm not going to check email to 10 a.m. in the first 2 to 3 hours of my day, I'm going to actually do X. You're right. You're just going to be more of a productive person. But if you go digging into that email, basically you are focusing on other people's priorities, and your priority is then deemed less important by yourself. Like you're saying your own priority isn't as important.
Preach.
So yeah.
Amen. What you said.
And then do you have a hobby?
I have tons of hobbies. Oh man. Yeah. So I actually do go fishing. I love fishing. It's pretty enjoyable. And there's lots of beautiful lakes in Kentucky. I paint miniatures. I'm a huge board game person, and there's so many miniatures and board games that are white people. And I want more people of color in my board games. So I do a lot of miniature painting. Sometimes I do embroidery while I watch TV. I like having these little activities mainly because I am an anxious person. And so it's a productive use of my brain and my creativity that doesn't feel exhausting, and that because it's too easy to lean on coping mechanisms like drinking, because I definitely have leaned on drinking really hard in my life before. and so like having these other activities, it has made my life richer, and I don't feel like my day is all work anymore. Like even if I work like a 10-hour day, if I have a hobby I can lean on, I feel like part of my day is mine, you know? And that's important. Yeah.
Oh, good for you. And
Thank
then
you.
if somebody's like, I need one of these workshops, or I need Jessica to come to my company, where can they find all things Jessica?
Yeah, they can go to jessicabellamy.design, just www.jessicabellamy.design. If you send me an email, I reply as soon as I possibly can, and realize I do have that boundary, so it might not be within the first day. Give me like 2 days, and I got you. But yeah,
answer coming.
Yes, answer coming.
Well, perfect, Jessica. Thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Well, good people, I hope you all enjoyed that episode. Head on over to Instagram. I'm at Nache Snow, and let me know what you guys think. I loved her tips on creating visuals, like learn the basic composition and design principles, work on a communication strategy, meaning looking at your target audience, your call to action, and what the media vehicle is and why. And then ask yourself if the data should be asset facing or deficit facing, more objective versus more on advocacy. Are the images creating implicit bias? How do you build work in the macro context versus just focusing on the end user to continue to fight against stigmas? So heavy questions, but good questions. And so as you're creating your visuals for your job, for your business, for whatever, keep these things in mind. I think she gave us a lot to talk about, and why it's so important that we make sure that the visuals that we're putting out are very diverse. Even at the end of this episode, she mentioned board games, and something as simple as a board game, you do want to see yourself represented in it, right? So as you're creating products and visuals and all the things, please keep some of the information that she shared with us in mind. Anywho, I hope that you guys are safe and okay during this pandemic. Thank you to everyone out there who is doing what they're supposed to do, and all those who might be putting themselves at risk, be it the healthcare workers, grocery store workers, postal workers, police officers, military, you name it. I just want to say huge thank you from the bottom of my heart, because without you guys, we would not be still moving as a society. Okay? Anyway, thanks. If you love this episode, please share it. Share it on IG stories. Share it on a Facebook group. Rate me 5 stars in Apple Podcasts. Give the episode a thumbs up. All of that is greatly, greatly appreciated. And for the show notes for this page, just head on over to nachesnow.com/106. All right. You guys have an amazing week, and I will chat with you guys later. Bye.